titanium exhaust sound like a great idea until you find yourself the day before your track day having to deal with issues that you find in your pre-track inspection. Yeah, so that guy is completely disconnected. However, we still made it to the track, and super grateful for my friend Tim to let me borrow his car entirely, which is kind of crazy. But I'm also pretty lucky to have, someone or friends that will let you just borrow their car, track it. So this is going to become an impromptu quick review of the E92 M3 on track. I would say I have driven this car to at least the limit of the tires as I see it. I've driven it on the street too, but it really comes alive on track. Let me just start with the positives. The steering wheel is pretty good like this. Basically, the steering feel is pretty good. The size of the wheel is too big in my opinion, but small correction. The pedals are amazing, nice and clicky, nice and big. And for some reason I really like the buttons. They're very clicky. I think like if the wheel was maybe like an inch or 2 inches in diameter smaller, then it'll pretty much be a perfect wheel setup. So this car has coilovers, one-way adjustable coilovers, V730s, 6th track day, 275 square, and then AP Racing kit in the front with DS 1.11, I think. This is not my car, so I'm not driving it 10/10, but 9/10, I guess. And it's a new setup, so like it hasn't really been fully tuned to take advantage of, maximum grip. I'm saying this because in its current form, the car is very understeery. Actually, it's not very understeery. It doesn't really understeer much on entry, especially with road braking, but on exits, it does. And I think for cars like this that I've driven that do the whole like enter as well, exits, understeer, the drivers tend to use the throttle to throttle steer their way out of there. So I tried to do that, but it wasn't letting me in M mode or MDM mode. And so for the last session, I just turned off traction control, and I think, it'll let you do that. It's not really good practice, but it lets you do that. In fact, the loss of grip in the rear in this car is so progressive. It's probably one of the best progressive, losses of rear I've ever driven. I felt like every time I lost grip in the back, it was like I knew it was going to happen and I could easily control it with the throttle. You don't have a lot of torque to get you in trouble, but you do have a nice range of RPM. So like between like 4 and 8K, you can pretty much like slowly control how much throttle like you're feeding it to make the rear step out. As far as acceleration goes, it's not the fastest car on the market, but it really shines on track. I would say surprisingly, there's a big difference between driving it on the streets and the track, especially if you're in the right gear. I think this car is really important to be in the right gear when you want to accelerate because your horsepower is on the top end. The C8 has a lot of torque the entire band, so like I'm not too worried about what gear I'm in. I think here it really punishes you if you're in the wrong gear at the exit of the corner. And then another thing is like the throttle pedal has the BMW thing where like it goes all the way to the end and then it clicks. I found out on the street that when you floor it without the click, going into the click gives you an extra gear to, for more, I guess, urgency. And I wish they wouldn't do this. I wish a floor would just be a floor and then, I don't know, the kick would, I don't know. But like, why is this a thing? Just give me full power when I floor it. However, on track, I didn't notice the difference between like click and no click when flooring it. So yeah, so that's a lot about the acceleration. I think, as the car is set up, a lot of like mid-corner to exits understeer, but like entry is really fine. The trail braking in this particular setup is not super easy. And I think it's because the brakes have a large range of motion. So like the C8 has one at wide pedal. This has a really skinny pedal, but the C8 has a smaller range of motion, which I think like a lot of people may like. People say, oh, I can modulate the brakes or whatever, right? The way I see it, since I drive a lot of sim, is when I'm on the brake pedal, I do not want to physically have to move my leg in and out to modulate the brakes. I just want to increase or decrease the amount of pressure I'm putting on the brakes. You have to be more physical with trailing. There's also like initial bites where your brakes seem to not matter. I think it's less so on track. And I think it's just because, you're pressing until you start to feel the G's, right? And then the other thing is, with the braking in this car, it doesn't handle fast braking or quick braking or stabs of braking as good as like the C8. So what I mean by that is the speed at which I could apply the brakes and keep everything nice and stable, ABS is happy and all that, was a lot less. It may be because I can feel so much more through the brakes and through the wheels, but I did notice that like if I were to brake like I would brake in the C8s, then the car will wiggle. Cars always wiggle when braking, you know, on track, but this is like this is wiggling, you know. And maybe part of it is also because he has the AP fronts and AP rears. So yeah, I mentioned that there's like maybe like a tiny dead zone of brake pedal application. I think I'm also seeing it when I try to throw brake, which is I'm trailing off, and then when I think I have like, you know, like the 10 to 0% left, I take my foot into the 10% range and there's just no more brakes. So I just lift off and, you know, it just pops back up. So weird way to describe what I'm trying to say, but ultimately what I mean is it's easy to throw brake in this car until you get to like the last 10%. It might be car, not all E92s drive like this, but yeah, overall, honestly, pretty good experience. I think one thing that I'm learning or noticing is I don't need aero as much as I thought. This car is really, really stable at high speeds, and essentially, not that I'm surprised, you know, that any car is stable at high speeds, but like I have no rear wiggle. So this might be like a mid-engine C8 issue, might be setup for this car. Since again, I said it's a little understeer, so it might just be like high speeds, like, you know, it's even more understeer. However, one of the reasons I went with aero in my car and why you see a lot of C8s with the wing and no splitter is because at high speeds, the C8 does not feel good. I would say at high speeds here, this car feels really good. The V730s, I would say, do not get to peak grip until like the second lap. So like out lap, first lap, second lap. And I think, you know, here's where you get peak grip. It's not very obvious because you still have some grip from like the get-go, but I think you have to build and work that heat into it. So we talked about acceleration, we talked about braking, and kind of talked about the mid-corner experience. I would say this car can probably benefit with some setup. You know, it probably has like 1, maybe 2 seconds hidden in setup, and depending on like if the car is set up to the style of the driver, you know, of the car. But overall, a good experience. Like, this is the most comfortable I've ever been going to track in a while. Like, it's leather seats, you know, leather steering wheel. It's got my CarPlay, it's not too loud. So I think it's a good experience for me to reevaluate like my goals with the C8 and see, do I want to keep suffering in the car every time I'm driving to track? You might be saying just trailer it, but yeah. Anyway, that's the impromptu E92 M3 review. So the cup holders are finally useful for once. But yeah, otherwise a successful track day. Sad I couldn't do it with my car. At the end of the day, that is the stick that I measure every other car by, and it's still a pretty good stick. So shout out to Tim for letting me basically rent his car, and see you guys in the next one. Bye.